Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, my name is Irmgard Maria Fellner. I'm the Director for Culture and Foreign Policy in the German Federal Foreign Office. And it's my particular privilege to welcome three eminent ladies of German-Italian bridge building, Francesca Melandri, Nora Bossong, and Tonia Mastrobuoni. We will have a very fascinating talk about culture, literature, and the role of culture in societies. And as a representative of the Federal Foreign Office, we are very much interested in underlying the eminence of culture and literature in our societies. We live in interesting times, as we diplomats say. We all have seen that in the pandemic, the role of culture cannot be valued enough. It was seen as the glue that kept our societies together, and a very important vector of our societies to continue to exist, to carry hope, and to help people to overcome the enormous solitude that was linked to the quarantines that people had to undergo. It is for us very important to note that through literature, through culture, our societies have the possibility to address the historic facts, the unspeakable, the unnameable things that will not openly discussed, and things that are undercurrents. In literature, in culture in general, lies an enormous reservoir of resilience, of societal strength for shaping the future. Things that cannot be discussed can be addressed through literature. And this is especially important in times when historic facts can no longer be related by eyewitnesses. And next generations will have to rely on authenticity or authentic narratives to understand what happens, to have an emotional access to the facts of our history. That is true for Germany, that is true for Italy, and for other countries and cultures as well. I would like to thank very much our two authors, Francesca Melandri, who had written the fascinating novel Sangue Giusto about family history over 3 generations that has a link to Italy's past as a colonial power. She is with us from Rome, and I would also like to thank Nora Bossong, a German author who has written her recent book Schutzzone, that I would translate into English as Safety Zone, about historic facts and conflicts in Africa, and the diplomatic difficulties that were connected to it. And then Tonia Mastrobuoni, she's the correspondent of La Repubblica, and probably one of the most learned journalists in German-Italian relations. We are looking forward to a fascinating debate of the 3 ladies, and are very curious to learn what they have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fellner, and let me introduce this panel that I'm really honored to moderate with 2 wonderful women and 2 wonderful novelists and intellectuals. Let me introduce this panel with a very provocative title, From Windschutz to Auschwitz. It was a title of a book of a very, very important historian, Jürgen Zimmerer. Windhoek is a place in Namibia, And Namibia is one of these blind spots that Germany removed for decades. And this historian, Jürgen Zimmerer, he established a link. He demonstrated there was a link between Namibia and Nazi Germany, between the idea of exterminating a people and, of course, the Shoah. This, as controversial as this book may seem and has been discussed among historians, but it is a fact that Germany has recognized only in recent years that there had been a big problem with its colonial history, that in a certain sense this image of a good German colonialist was totally wrong, that it has been a ferocious colonialist country like Belgium or like France or like even the Brits. So my first question goes to Nora Bossong, because your last wonderful novel, Schutzzone, treats with another former colony, German colony, which was in the German East Africa, which is, and it, in a certain sense, talks about that and other topics that we will go in depth later. But my first question to you, Nora Bossong, is why did Germany what did it so long for Germany to recognize this this truth about its past? Because in Namibia we have the first genocide in his history between 1904 and 1997, and not among the Armenians as we thought until 10 or 20 years ago. It was in Namibia, it was 120 years ago, and Germany, who has taught the world how to cope with its past when it comes to the Nazi past, hasn't been able to do the same with its colonialism. Why, Nora Bossong?
I think that it is connected. The German past has so dark and terrible aspects, and the Shoah is like the very deepest catastrophe that we ever have seen. Well, we three didn't see it, but we read about it, we learned about it, that it overshadowed the memory of the past. And I think that in the first step, it's okay, and it's even, I would say, maybe the right way to focus on the Shoah, because it is like really the end of civilization that we had. And but then the memory of the colonial past could have been started a bit earlier. And I think that after the First World War, when Germany lost its colonies with the Versailles Treaty, we actually lost also our memory to this time. And what you mentioned with the question, was Windhoek the first step to Auschwitz? I mean, that is right now discussed very intensely in Germany. We had the debate about Gilles Mbembe, a post-colonial thinker. We had the question of is it okay to connect post-colonial terror or colonial terror, colonial suffering to the suffering that was witnessed and that was received by the Jews during the Second World War. And we have two very opposite ideas of that. One part says, no, we cannot connect the Shoah to anything else, and it would make the memory of the Shoah smaller if we connect it to other terrible aspects in history. The others say, yes, we have to connect, because otherwise we don't get it into discussion, we don't get it into dialogue. So I'm more or less, I think that the second version is more productive, and it's not about making the memory of the Shoah smaller, but to learn from different aspects of terror, of totalitarian power and suffering. So I think that as long as it took Germany to look at Namibia, at what happened also in Burundi and Rwanda, where genocides took place years and decades after the colonial time, that we now have the chance to look at it more closely and to learn from the mistakes we made before.
Thank you, Nora Bossong. Francesca Melandri, you also wrote a novel recently, which was also very, very loved in Germany. I made an interview once to a politician, and he told me, "Did you read already Francesca Melandri's novel?" It was a German politician. I said, "Yes, of course." He said, "It's wonderful. Everybody's reading it." And this novel is about an Ethiopian man who comes to Rome and shows up in a family and says that essentially his grandfather was Italian. So this episode at the beginning of the novel, of a wonderful novel, is a sort of Big Bang in the family, and a lot of decades of hypocrisy come out. But Francesca Melandri is able to tell us also about the hypocrisy of a whole country who has not coped with the damages, the horrible things it did in Ethiopia, in other colonies in Africa, and still does, because there is a part in the book where she describes the cooperation in the 1980s, and behind this noble world, of course, bribes and corruption were hidden for years and years. So I want to ask Francesca Melandri, I didn't mention before that both the authors, and we will talk about it, have strong links to the other countries. So Francesca Melandri grew up in Italy, but she has strong links to the German culture, let's say, like this, and politics. And also Nora Bossong, who studied also in Rome, and we will talk about also Antonio Gramsci, that she, I think, studied a lot. But Francesca Melandri, I want to ask you first, why did you want to describe this blind spot of the Italian history, which is Italian colonialism in Africa?
Yeah, thank you. Well, as you mentioned, the beginning of the story is actually not during the colonial times, the occupation times, but it's in a recent now. It's actually in 2010, during the second visit of Muammar Gaddafi to his then friend Silvio Berlusconi, which was like the apotheosis of everything post-colonialism can do and be wrong. It was like a master course in how to handle post-colonial thought the wrong way, thought and practice the wrong way. So it was, for me, very important to tell the link within a family of the past of Italian occupation in then Abyssinia, Ethiopia, and today's migrations and today's fluxes of immigrants. This young man, which you mentioned, comes to the doorstep of my protagonist through the immigration routes, through the Sahara, through the terrible lager in Libya, through Lampedusa, and so on. And the effect of a country like Italy, which has absolutely not handled or looked at its colonial past, not in an academic way, because academics, historians, the history is well known and has been researched and is being researched. What I'm speaking about is in the mainstream. The mainstream telling of our history hasn't until recently not included our colonial past. And this ignorance, this unpreparedness has a lot to do, in my opinion, with our unpreparedness and how can I say, nasty naivete in handling the migrant crisis and the relationship with these people who, many of them, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them come exactly from those places which we refuse or have refused to recognize as places where something happened which is connected to us, like Somalia, like Eritrea, for instance, and for a short time, even Ethiopia. And it's interesting what Nora says about the reason why the colonial terrible past of Germany has been not addressed for such a long time, is in a way exactly like so many things between Italy and Germany, it's exactly the like mirror image of what has happened in Italy. We have not looked at our colonial past because we have not done that incredible work that the German country and population and also governments have done in respect to the Nazi past, to the addressing as it's almost like a civic religion to, have this exactly always in front of the people of Germany's eyes, which is something exactly we didn't do in Italy. And the reason why we're not, if I understand rightly what Nora says, there is the Shoah between Germans and their colonial past. And in Italy's case, there is the not acknowledgement of our fascism time and our participation, by the way, also with the Shoah and our colonial times. So there is, this block goes both ways.
Yes, I would stick to you for a moment, excuse me, Nora, because you mentioned Libya, no? Libya has a role in your novel because he has to go through Libya where the conditions, of course, are horrible. We know this, people are tortured. He sees horrible things going through Libya. And also there, I mean, we have a lot of, we have a sort of, in the last 10 years, we have seen Italy being leading in this approach to stabilize Libya after Gaddafi's death, no? This has totally failed. Not only, but the Italian leadership has been so weak, and I think it's an Italian leadership, I know that it's an Italian leadership that comes out of this how do you say, thing that Italian was its colonialist country, so now it has reclaimed a leadership that we don't understand where it comes from. But in any case, it's so weak that now we have a proxy war in Libya. And here I come to also to the role of UN, which I will want to discuss with Nora. But what do you think about this, Francesca Melandri, horrible situation in Libya and about the responsibilities we have in this? Because I mean, Libya is now the country through which all the migrants come from also from deeper Africa. So it is a country where it is told us that without a stabilization we can't stop the migration. But is this the right approach?
Well, now for once, I would like not to defend, because nobody needs my defense, but let's say to put the behavior of the Italian government in context. And the context is, as you mentioned, the UN, of course, but even before that, the EU. The failure in Libya is a failure certainly of Italy, but I would say of the EU. As all the policies about migration, and Lampedusa is not the door of Italy. Lampedusa is the door of Europe. And in this respect, Italy has been, I think, left somewhat alone in the handling of, this being the doorstep of our common house, Europe, for way too long. And the mess in Libya is certainly a failure on the Italian government. And one must remember that until, I would say, 20 or 20-something years ago, there was a tradition in Italian foreign policy of a very strong and deep and also sophisticated tradition of handling with the southern coast of the Mediterranean, all the relationship also with the Arab and Islamic, and not Islamic, but Arabic leaders. And this value that Italy had to add to foreign policy has been totally squandered, also by Berlusconi, for instance, in handling things like I tell in my book, with personal handlings with dictators like Gaddafi. So the problem in Libya is not an Italian problem, is a European problem. It's actually a world peace problem. Also, I am really scandalized at the way the European Union, which I consider my country, I mean, I'm Roman, Italian, and European. My home is Europe, and I'm scandalized at the way my home, the parliament of my home, is not able to pass a resolution which whatever will be the solution in Libya, which will be complicated and it probably will be long, but whatever that takes, for now, we have to take those people out of those concentration camps. Now, we have to take them out now. And it would be so, I don't say easy, but feasible. It's something that can be done with really relatively short, and it's not impossible. And this, for me, should be the basis of any talk about Libya. We have people living in subhuman conditions, as you were saying, being tortured, being murdered. This is at our doorstep. How can we expect to be the continent of civil rights and of democracy and even morally, physically stand this? This is the thing that I think should be the first thing to be addressed.
Yes, and first we should recognize that it's concentration camps, but also this is already difficult for the European governments. Nora Bossong, you wrote a novel about, and the center of this novel is the UN, which I found very, very interesting. And also you studied in Italy, and you know that one of the most quoted sentences of a historic figure, a very important figure that you studied a lot, Antonio Gramsci, is odio gli indifferenti, I hate the indifferent. So the UN, I think of it as an institution that bases also on this principle that you can't ignore, you can't watch while people are tortured, while people are treated badly, while regimes are, in a certain sense, destroying populations without intervening. No? And words like peace and justice are always written very big in this institution. But we know, and not only in Libya, that this is utopia. And in your novel, it's very clear that when you speak about these principles, also through the main figure of the novel, Schutzzonen, and you go in these countries like Burundi, these words are like dying in the field of these countries. What do you think? I mean, I repeat, the UN, the image that you give of the UN is in a certain sense also, there are some funny parts, no? For example, the test when she does her reports and she puts a strange word in it and nobody sees it, and this is a game for her to see how bureaucratic this institution has become. Nora Bossong, I'm sorry.
Yeah. First, I want to thank Francesca Melandri for her words about Libya, and I think that's absolutely true. And as terrible as the situation is there, we even have it in the EU. We have the camps in Greece, and we don't do anything about it. I mean, we right now we get some 50, 60, 70 children to Germany who are really suffering with their parents, but that's all. And that are camps that were built for 3,000 people, and now they're living like 10 times of these people who can live there in a somehow human way. So that was first what I wanted to say. And then, yes, what you said about the words peace and justice, and the question of responsibility or international responsibility. We had the case in Rwanda, which was together with Srebrenica. There were the two terrible cases where the UN didn't intervene, where the UN just saw what happened, and that was genocide 2 times, from the time very closely connected. And the law changed after that. We have a responsibility to protect right now, so which has its difficulties as well. It's not that easy just to say now we can, as the international community, just invade into countries. That's not the right way either. But the situation in Rwanda, that I know a bit better than Srebrenica, was that the European countries didn't feel reliable for that, and that they didn't want to lose elections. They didn't want to sell to the people, well, our soldiers died there because of a country you didn't even know that it exists, and a word that, well, it's really clear if what's he called, Mitterrand said it, but it's sad that he said it, and it's dans ce pays-là, un génocide, c'est pas très important. So genocide in these countries, it's not that important. And Mitterrand was highly connected to the government of Rwanda, who planned the genocide. And of course, as well as the connections in the days of 1994, we have connections to the past. And we have a situation where one part of the Rwandan population killed the other one. And we have the trauma of colonial terror, colonial injustice that has never really been treated as it should have been. So I wouldn't say that Germany is, or the foreign German government is responsible for the genocide, but there are parts of the past that the German government of these days was responsible for. And so I think that Germany, or the West together, is responsible to look at these countries, to look at the traumas that do still exist, and to look at very seriously on the power that is misused, and like these sentence. Genocide is not that important in these countries. That says everything about arrogance of the Western, and that says everything about that all men are created equal, but when they're alive, they're not equal anymore. And I think that's quite sad that we in 2020 or in 1994 are still so far away from the ideals, from the morals we are talking about.
Thank you, Nora. I think that you touched one very important topic, which is the topic of the responsibility. Once when I was, let's say, younger, in the 80s, there was still a debate about how responsible are we towards these countries. I mean, it was not an in-depth debate about the colonialism, but there was a debate that said there's a link between our responsibility to take these people, so for this migration to Europe, and the damages we did in these countries. What do you think, Francesca Melandri? Why is this discussion so dead in Europe? I mean, there is a link between colonialism maybe and the responsibilities we have as European countries in taking these people.
Well, we're talking about the ruminations and understandings and cognitive shifts about half a millennium of history, which is the colonial half millennium. It's the last 500 years of world history in which Western powers, that is the country with the white people, has gone around the world and basically taken it, divided it like the famous cake of the Berlin Conference. And Africa has been the cake of the cake, because Africa has the misfortune probably of being a continent which is super abundant in all the earthly riches which everybody wants, from minerals and so on. And first thing, and second thing, its people. Its people have been the workforce which has fueled the new world, which has made the new world the industrial powerhouse of the world in the last century, especially, of course, the United States. So there has been 500 years, and now I'm not even going into the colonialism in Asia, but let's just talk about Africa. For 500, or several centuries, Africa has been the continent from which things and people were taken to make us rich. And now, with many events coming all together, and not being necessarily new, but let's say being obvious. And for instance, the Black Lives Matter movement, the post-colonial studies coming out of a small elitist niche or very minoritarian niche in which they were. And here we are, two writers writing books which get to the public, not just to the academics, about these things. And we're not the only ones, and we're not the first ones. So, but it's interesting to see a lot of them are women, which I think also makes sense, because in this cognitive shift, all viewpoints are being addressed, all viewpoints are being questioned. And of course, colonialism is in the same package as white supremacy, as male supremacy, as capitalist supremacy. It's all the same package. So unpacking it means looking at it from all these angles and critiquing it and seeing COVID-19 has like punched us in the face with the fact, it's not an opinion, with the fact that it's not sustainable. This can't go on like this. This is not the way humanity can survive. So migrations, I'm sorry, I took a long road, but to answer your question, migrations and the influx of migrants to our rich countries have been made rich with all of this history. And also another issue which is too little addressed is the freedom of movement. If people have to go through the terrible desert routes and then terrible camps and then maybe the crossing of the sea and paying passeurs thousands of dollars or euros, whereas we Europeans, when I went to Ethiopia for my book, I went twice. I took a flight up and down both times. It wasn't even expensive. Ethiopian Airlines, very, very easy. While the young guy of my book couldn't do that. Now, why? Why is that? So the freedom of movement, again, my home Europe in this is so back in the discussion, is so really lagging behind in a very needed discussion, because you were mentioning even just having the European institutions accept that those are concentration camps. But even before that comes the idea that why should we, carriers of a white skin, have freedom of movement, and why not all the others? Why is that right, which is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the right to move? Why is that actually only for us, but not? Why don't we grant it to others? It's a big discussion. It's a, again, cognitive shift inducing discussion. It's something that has to addresses all the paradigms of fortress Europe, fortress Western world, fortress civilized Western model, but needs to be done. Why is a woman my age, educated like me, who has studied, who has interest in the world, in coming from Burundi or Rwanda, why can't she take a flight to visit Rome, like I can to visit the capital of our country or any other place I wish, if I get a visa, or even without a visa? Why is that? It's a basic question. And I think, as in the introduction said, what is the role of culture? Well, the role of culture is, first of all, not hiding the fact that we are in the face of a major cognitive shift. And we could even call it a cognitive apocalypse. Like, everything we thought we knew is crumbling in front of our eyes. And this is not easy to take. This is very difficult to take. This can induce thoughts and understanding and new behaviors, but it can also induce, and we're also witnessing this everywhere, very big resistance, very strong, even violent resistance, the backlash to the understanding. And so what we storytellers and thinkers or observers can do is to, as Nora was saying, talk about this. Anything that you don't talk about, it's impossible to navigate. You can only be a victim of it. Or you can only be a victim of those who have the strongest reactions, and those are the violent ones. We don't want them to win the discussion.
Nora Bossong, Francesca Melandri spoke about a cognitive apocalypse. I think this is a very interesting thing to say about what is happening to us. One politician in Europe seems to have understood. She doesn't quote these. She doesn't quote, cultural things, but she argues always with demographics. And it is Angela Merkel. She said 5 years ago, we can do it, wir schaffen das. And she always says, we need these people also, because we will be less and less and less and so on. And she does this also because I think she's politically really convinced that we should do it, so as it seems. But Europe had split since then. We know that there is an eternal resistance to this, which is formed by 4 countries at least, the Visegrad countries. And we know, and Italy has experienced this, that very strong populist parties have soared and have strengthened because of the belief of Angela Merkel and of very few other politicians that we can do it, that Europe can do it. What do you think, Nora Bossong?
Well, I think that, on the one hand, I think we can do it, but we can only do it together. Or it's at least easier to do it together. On the other side, it's quite easy from Germany to say that. It's more difficult for Italy. And we had already Lampedusa, and it's not that like Sylt or Hiddensee, like small islands that belong to Germany. We have maybe some Danish teen who enters Germany through this door, but we don't have like huge migration that arrives directly in Germany. And I think that the Dublin 3 is a problem, is a huge problem. I think that the growing populism is a problem, but we cannot, it's like, we cannot say, okay, then we go back because we have the populists who don't want immigration. We have the populists who want total sovereignty. They don't want that anyone else mixes up with our inner things. That would mean to follow what they say. And for example, Berlusconi was already a strange figure of populism. He was somebody who played with fascist symbols. I remember this. I think it even comes in the novel from Francesca Melandri, this Meno male che Silvio c'è, this weird song that was really weird. And he was standing with a crowd in front of this fascist building in Rome, in Iwer. And that was in, when was it, 2008 or so? So we already had this populist movement, very strong. And we had this idea that you can, again, play with fascist symbols. We have that in different countries, very, very strong at the moment. We have them at the government. In Germany, we only have at the moment, quite small AfD, but they might be small. They shift more and more to, Nazi ideology, not all of them, but some politicians of this party. But to say, okay, we are so afraid of them that we stop any attempt to be fair to migrants, to open us to our responsibility, would be the wrong way. I think we have just to have a good, open and clever discourse. And I think that in this case, novels and maybe TV series, films, like narratives can help more than just intellectual debates, because you will never ever touch every one of them. but by telling an individual story, you have so much more chance to touch somebody than with just abstract ideas of, well, justice, and yes, you have to leave your white privileges and so on. But you have to touch people, and then you can win them for the shift of ideas.
This is absolutely true. I mean, I learned a lot of, reading your novels, and also, for example, reading a novel years ago, which was illuminating for me, of Uwe Timm. He wrote about Namibia, for example, and I think he's still persona non grata in Namibia because of this novel, because he wrote about this wonderful commandant, this African, this Herero or Nama, was it, who fought against the Germans. And the Germans were so astonished by his genius that they thought he had read Clausewitz, which of course wasn't true. He was an African genius. He was, but even if he lost, I mean, he's a legend. And so, and also, of course, Francesca Melandri taught me a lot of things. I mean, I grew up in Italy. I grew up in Rome, and I didn't know many things about Ethiopia and about. I know more about what's happening in Libya, of course, because I'm a journalist, but I want to come back also to an argument that something you mentioned before, Francesca Melandri, which is Black Lives Matter. And a very interesting discussion that came out of Black Lives Matter is about what do we have to cancel, what do we have to rewrite to see in a different way. I mean, for example, I was very hit by this. I was very impressed by this fact that on the statue of Winston Churchill, which is of course he's an untouchable politician in Great Britain, and we know that the Britons are very strong nationalists and so on. But on this statue, in these weeks where there was protest against the old colonialists, in which statues were thrown into the rivers, and even Leopold, the Belgian king, and so on. Under the Churchill statue, there was someone sprayed, he was a racist. I want to ask both, what do you think about this? How far can we go? How far must we go? In Germany, for example, there is now a very long-going discussion about changing names of the streets, like in Berlin, the Mohrenstraße, or like something like this. What do you think? I'm asking both of you, maybe starting by Francesca and then Nora.
Well, I think the so-called cancel culture is a misnomer, because what is really, again, I'm in a way repeating myself, what we're really witnessing with all the complications and complexities and imperfections of the case is a change of viewpoint. And I will just give an example. Thomas Jefferson, one of the inventors of modern democracy, of constitutional rights, of the checks and balances of a state which is for the free, as he was writing the wonderful word, which in a way the United States history has been striving to actually make something true. So I'm not saying it's all fake, but as he was writing, all men are created equal, and this we know as a fact, he had slaves. So there was a whole part, all men are created equal. All men are created equal, and he was writing as out of the window of the study where he was literally penning this, there was an army of slaves making him very rich by working his plantations. So my point is, European democracy, capitalism, history, the last centuries, which we were talking about, the point is not to cancel them. The point is to bring to the light everything that has been canceled. The real cancel culture is not now. The real cancel culture has been operated by the founding fathers, for instance, of the American Constitution, where they simply did not mention the fact that they were living in a world which accepted and would accept for several decades more the fact that many men were not only not treated as equals, but were tortured to death by working in the fields. And this was cancelled by the discourse. So in a way, Churchill is complicated. I mean, he was the face of the resistance against the bombing of Hitler. So in a way, he was one of the winners of the war. That's true. He was also a colonialist and a racist, and that is also true. History is complicated, and that is the first thing. History is complicated. History is complex. What is coming now, the cognitive apocalypse, if you pass me this maybe dramatic term, is exactly in coming, letting the 9/10 of the iceberg of European history to come out. They were always there, but we have only talked about the 1/10. I was 2 years ago. I was for some months in Amsterdam, beautiful city. Who doesn't love Amsterdam? Amsterdam is built. The riches, the wealth, the freedom of thought. That's the paradox. The freedom of thought of Amsterdam is built on the Eastern Trade Company, the Dutch trading companies, who in the rest of the world looted, raped, brought stuff, and had slaves. So that is our complicated history. So we don't want to throw the baby with the dirty water, the baby of democracy, the baby of human rights, with the dirty water of colonialism, but we have to look at this dirty water. It's there. It stinks.
Nora Bossong, should we tear down Churchill's statue?
No, I think that would, well, it has no use. But I think if we see the US, when they helped end the Second World War, I'm very grateful for that, because I probably wouldn't live at all, but I wouldn't live in this Germany that we have now. But it was a country at the same time where still race segregation was going on. And when you look at the Nuremberg process, where you had the two big crimes against humanity and genocide, the US was not very fond of the term genocide, because it was focusing on groups that were tortured just because they were part of a group, of a racial or a religious group. They were not seen as individuals. And if this genocide would be the large crime the Nazis committed, then one would have to look at their own history and at their own presence and their own politics. So, I mean, again, I don't want to compare what was going on in race segregation in the US in the first half of the 20th century to the Shoah. The Shoah is a totally different story, and it's, like I said, the catastrophe of humanity. But if you put it into words of law, then you can connect different types of this committed crime. And so, yes, as Francesca Melandri said, it's complex, and we cannot just say. And I think that is what happens right now very often. That one side says Winston Churchill is a racist, so put this statue away. The other position is, no, he was a war hero. He defeated the enemies. He is like, yeah, he's like a religious person. But the truth is, it's not so difficult. Very often in the middle, and he might be, in some parts of his idea, of his thoughts, of his beliefs, being a racist. That does not mean that he didn't do a lot that was very, very good, and that we can be very, very grateful for. And we can, I think, if we look at the history of the US, for example, if we read Tocqueville again, he describes that how this all men are created equal did not work from the beginning on, because who was this man? Not everyone that we would count as man nowadays was counted as man. So yeah, let's just put it that way. We have this ambivalence, we have paradoxes, and we have to cope with it.
Mm-hmm. May I add just a little thing?
Yes, of course.
Just very, very fast. The interesting thing is that all that we're talking about, Nora is also talking about, that the so to speak, cancelled part. Who was it cancelled for? Us. Because there is a wealth of thought, writings, amazing intellectual figures, which have been there since the very beginning and which have spoken in the last century, Frederick Douglass, Du Bois, in this century, James Baldwin. The depth and profundity of thought and culture, which has been produced from the other viewpoint, is amazing. It was just not something that we as mainstream carriers of white skin thought that it was belonging to our history. So the major shift should not be erasing parts of history, but including more parts of history, which have always been there.
Mm-hmm. I want to, we have a few minutes left, but I want to ask both another question, which, when I interviewed Nora Krug is a German author. She lives in the United States, and she has written an incredible graphic novel about discovering her family. So she went beyond what everybody had said about her father and grandfather, and she discovered that he was a Nazi. Because she went into the archives, because she went back to the city where she grew up, and she did a really good research. And at a certain point she said, when I married my husband, who is a Jew, I discovered that I knew everything about the Shoah, but I didn't know anything about Pesach or Shabbat and so on. Nora Bossong, I don't know if you had the opportunity to go to the new permanent exhibition of the Jewish Museum in Berlin, which is wonderful because it was totally reorganized in 3 years, and it tries to show more of the interaction between the German and the Jewish culture, which are the same. Let me pass this thing. So Christian and Jewish culture in Germany in 1,000 years, how did they relate to one another? Don't you think, I'm asking you both to conclude this wonderful session, that this is also the problem? I mean, we are living with people. We have talked about migration. We haven't talked about integration. We are living in countries where Turkish people, Ethiopian people, Libyan people are living among us. How much do we know about this culture, and how do you say, how responsible are we, how guilty are we for not knowing their culture enough? I'm asking maybe before Nora Bossong and then Francesca Melandri.
Okay. Yes, I would say if we have the word integration, as you put it, integration would mean that we as well should integrate if we want to have an open and a really global society. It's not that everyone just looks at itself. And of course, like what we see in the discussions, for example, about Achille Mbembe and the Shoah, we look so closely on the guilt of our fathers, grandfathers, mothers, grandmothers, maybe. We as non-Jewish Germans, I would say, we are so, that's a bit cynical, but we are so in love in the guilt that we still stay totally with the interest of German culture, in so on. I didn't see the exhibition yet, but it's on my list. And I see that, for example, which was not a really good idea, that the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, the biggest party in Germany, made an attempt to show their interest in Jewish life. And that was a bit more like a carnival. That was not the right attempt. The idea was good, but then what came out was not so good. But yes, I mean, and for example, a friend of mine, author Navid Kamani, who wrote about what we lost And he is Iranian, son of Iranian immigrants in Germany. He grew up in Germany, and he was when he held his speech. I don't know what it was about the Shoah. He was talking about his feel of loss, and that's a viewpoint that I think is very important. The guilt is important too, but that closes the eyes to what really happened and what Europe lost in humanity, in ideas, in culture, and just to let this sadness grow. And I think that is more tense than just to look too close only on our Nazi grandfathers. That would explain the history again only with the words of Nazis, even if we do it in the negative way, so the anti-way.
Francesca Melandri.
May I be a little provocative? I question the use of the word we. I'll give an example. One of my very best friends, and a woman I'm honored to, as I say, count as my friend, is Ijaba Shego. And she's a wonderful, you certainly know who she is. She's a wonderful, in my opinion, she's one of the leading Italian intellectuals in this moment. And she is Italian. And we always say that she's much more Romana than me, because I'm not really Romana, I'm a strange mix, but she's really Romanissima. And she's an Italian national, but she's dark-skinned because she comes from a Somali heritage. So she is Somali Italian. And she's a wonderful author. You have certainly read her books, and she's also translated in German and in Germany and all over the world. And we WhatsApp all the time about current events. A lot of what I'm telling you now comes from the discussion, from the fertile exchange of ideas that I have with these wonderful friends who belong to so many different backgrounds. So I find it a little difficult, honestly, to keep on telling we should help them integrate. Society is absolutely changing, and I am not only idealistically and naively aiming at, but which I observe in my personal life and in the streets which I walk in Rome and in Europe, is already much more integrated than is recounted by the media. Why is that? Because the media are not that well integrated. Not so many new Europeans, so to speak, have the voices, have the power to tell the stories. They exist, but they're still a lot or too much talked about than talking. And in my opinion, that is a big problem. The continuous talking of the migrants and the migrant crisis and the new Europeans among us as we talk about them. But it doesn't work like this. And fortunately, it's already not like this, or it's a lot less like this than we keep on talking about. Society is more already integrated, paradoxically. The industries in the north of Italy would not work would not function like Germany without the former immigrant workers, many of whom are now Italians. They just have skins of different colors, but their children go to school together, their women cook together and eat, chat together, and they work also together. So this is already happening. In a way, I think, again, the help we should give as intellectuals and storytellers and recounters of the present is to be more observant of what actually is happening, and also shut up a little bit and give voice more to other subjects of narration, because that is a big thing that also Black Lives Matter is telling us. Please start to shut up and listen. We should shut up and listen a lot more.
And read your books. Thank you, Nora Bossong, and thank you, Francesca Melandri, for opening us opening our eyes about colonialism, about migration, about other countries, other cultures who are our cultures and our countries. And thank you for building bridges also between Italy and Germany, which is very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.